and welcome back to Those Astrology Girls. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Keelie.
And today we have a great episode for you all about the planets. This is going to allow you to bring things together in your astrological knowledge or just deepen what you already know. Now, to kick us off today, before we get started in telling you all about these planets, what they mean, what are their symbols, who rules them, all the good fun details, I'm just dying to know if Keelie has a favorite planet.
That's a really good question, Nicole. And I would say, if I had to pick, I would say Jupiter.
That's not what I expected, but tell me why. Tell me why Jupiter.
Okay, so Jupiter is the planet, which we're going to get into all of these. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, I guess. But I just love how expansive and abundant of a planet it is. And Jupiter really is the part of our chart where we can really look to just kind of expand in some ways that we're really seeking in life. And I just like it. I don't know. It's so big. It's such a big, beautiful, just joyful planet in our chart that really brings us so much happiness and joy. That's Jupiter's gift to us in life and in our chart. And I love that. What about you? I want to hear yours.
Well, it's funny. I figured you would turn the tables on me and ask this question. And I was thinking about it and I was like, well, I can tell you the planets that I don't like. And then I was like, and it's going to feel so obvious to say this, but I love Pluto.
I knew it. I knew you were going to say Pluto. You Plutonian individual, you.
I know. I have Pluto so importantly aspected in my chart. I just feel like I've been working with it forever. And when I think of how cool Pluto is in the context of just being so important to our transformation and the ability to transform, but in such a personal way, but also a larger context, it just feels really an important planet to be friends with, and I really like it. But if I did have to pick my least favorite planet, it's Mercury.
That's so funny.
I know. It's not that I don't like it. I just feel one, it's just a lot. A lot of energy. There's a lot going on there. And while Mercury's super important to my chart as well, I'm just oh gosh, it's just a lot. It's Mercury has baggage, in my opinion. I mean, Pluto definitely has baggage, but Mercury to me feels just oh, okay, whatever. Meanwhile, nobody would probably say their favorite planet is Pluto, but here we are.
No, probably. I mean, maybe some people. I mean, it is really cool just how Pluto, wherever it touches, wherever it comes, it really does tell a story about how we're here to transform over the course of our life, which I love. But it's so funny because Mercury's literally my chart ruler, Nicole. So I'm a Mercurian, Mercurian individual here. And you're they're just very all over the place or whatever you said. I don't know.
No, I just said it's a lot. And I just feel there's a lot of mental energy going on with that. And I just feel I already deal with my own mental energy that I'm when Mercury comes onto the scene, I'm oh my gosh, that's a lot to deal with. But I have Mercury conjunct my sun, super conjunct. So I feel maybe Mercury just gets a free pass in my own chart where I don't feel I have to deal with it. But I don't know. I just feel for Mercury going retrograde so many times throughout the year, I'm okay,
you're
Mercury.
Tired of it. You're all this Mercury stuff. I'm just over.
Everyone's talking about Mercury all the time, and I'm poor Pluto.
You're probably not alone. Honestly, probably a lot of people would say that Mercury's not their friend.
Yeah, as someone who's afraid of making little mistakes sometimes, Mercury's caught ya. You did that.
Yeah.
So that's always funny to me. But, hopefully today, after you listen to this episode, you will be able to pick your favorite planet and maybe your least favorite planet, or you're going to notice where these influences in your life are coming in stronger and be able to identify that in your chart. And so, planets, all the planets in astrology are influencers of how our chart is expressing itself. And so we've talked about the 12 signs. We did an episode on that, episodes 2 and 3. We talked about your sun, moon, and rising, episode 1. And we talked about Saturn and Pluto, episodes 4 and 5. And now we're going to talk about the planets. We also have an episode on the houses. So you can put a lot of things together now to create this view of your own blueprint. And they guide different aspects of our life. There's different places in which their influence shows up. And we're going to talk about that. And it's planets really add the cherry on top of things to really understanding everything. They're much more important than the cherry on top, but it really adds that picture and makes it more concrete when we're looking at your whole natal chart. And this will give you a way to really start working with things. And we've talked about how important the luminaries are, your sun and your moon, and of course your rising sign, which is an angle in your chart. But planets, you'll notice, like Keelie said, she works really well or a lot with Mercury. I love Pluto. Like, there's different aspects of our chart that are really on the scene that are here to make a big impact in our life. And so this will help you understand which ones they are, and you'll start to notice their influence even more.
Yeah. All of the planets represent various aspects of ourself and the ways that we operate out in the world. If you think about it, your sun energy, we'll get into the sun, it'll be the first one we talk about, but that is really like 70% of who you are out in this world. We talk about that in episode 1. All of the other planets in your chart revolve around the sun. The sun really is that core part of you, but all the other planets revolving around the sun really flavor how your sun energy is showing up in the world. These planets are all nuances and subtleties of the way that you are uniquely you out in the world and the unique way that you came here to live your purpose through your sun energy. And so, like Nicole said, we have so many other episodes now up until this point that, this episode that we're giving you guys today, going through all of the planets, really does kind of complete this well-rounded foundation of your natal astrology chart. You now have all of the key pieces and components that you need to really create a synthesis around how you are showing up in the world and how each of these aspects of you through all the different planets, how they show up in the world based on the sign that they're in and where they show up in the world. The area of life that these aspects of you seek to be expressed, that is through the house. So today, as we're going through each of the planets and the luminaries, the sun and the moon, again, episode 1 is going to have a lot of detail around those, but we're going to step into them in a little bit of a different way today. But as we're going through each of these, really think about, okay, these are the aspects. We all have all of these planets in our chart. Every single one of us has every single one of these planets in our chart. It's just how these aspects of us show up in the world are going to be very different. So really feel into all these different aspects of yourself. It's almost like you're wearing different hats. You know how like when we were in grade school, you'd put on like this hat for like this thinking person and like this thinking hat for this thinking. I don't even know if I'm describing it right, but I think we all kind of remember just like all the different hats you can wear. It's like all of these planets are just like different hats that you're putting on to wear, maybe in relationship, maybe when you're learning and you're in school, or maybe when you're behind closed doors and you're feeling emotional and sensitive, or your feelings got hurt. Like, how's that part of you showing up? Maybe it's the way you're showing up in the world, the way that you're structured, or the way that you seek, to be original and innovative. Like everything I'm describing right now are some flavors around how these aspects of you, like, are flavors of like each of these planets that we're going to dive into. So think about these are the parts of you and connect them with the energies of the sign that we talked about in episode 2 and 3 and connect them to the energies of each of the house based on like the sign and the house that they're in. And that really does allow you to synthesize this part of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, before we decide to incarnate here on Earth, now this is my personal view, so if you don't agree with it, that's totally fine. But as we decide to incarnate here on Earth, like, we're building our birth charts. It's all part of our pre-birth plan, before coming here as a human. And we're picking what generation are we going to come in as, right? And a lot of people lately are talking about in the beginning of 2025, they're like, oh, this is the beginning of generation beta. And I was like, no, that happened when Pluto moved into Aquarius, but like, whatever, we're not going to we're not going to email the news and tell them wrong, but all astrologers everywhere is going, yeah, okay, whatever, that already happened. But you're picking that bigger generation and where you're coming into. But then after that, I feel like we're handpicking all the life lessons and all the expressions and all the things that we need to learn through our birth chart by picking our planets and where they're going to end up being in the house, in the sign, and how they're all going to be laid out. And so it really becomes this like agreement that we're making with each of these planets so that we can have the experience we need in this lifetime. And it really makes it special to think about it that way, because then you're seeing, oh, you know what? Maybe I do have these 2 planets together in my chart in this house, and it feels like a lot, but also like, oh, doesn't that give me a little bit more perspective about how I'm here to live this life and express? And if I can use it for informative purposes and to help me be better and to help me express even more in that way, wow, what power do we have just held in those blueprints?
Yeah. It's so interesting to think about, right? Like our soul in this life came here to have this specific chart in human form. Like all of these qualities are flavoring just the way that our soul came here to be expressed out in the world. And, when you can think about it from this higher perspective like that, I just love it because it's really like feeling into all these parts of ourself and really like how they seek to be expressed and how can we really, embrace all of these individual parts of ourself in all of our different areas of life. So I think our birth chart is just such a powerful tool to just understanding ourselves in such a deeper way. And what we're going to dive into today, again, like really is going to give you this well-rounded view of just all the parts of you and who you came here to be. So also be sure, if you haven't already, make sure you check out like the house episode, the sign episode. And also if you want to know the sign in the house of each of these planets as we're talking about them, you can head to the show notes. We'll leave a link in there for you to run your chart so that you can kind of track and see for each planet we talk about what's the sign. Even look at the element too. That's fun. Like, is this sign, if it's too much to kind of think about the sign of the planet, think about the element. Is it fire? Is it air? Is it earth? Is it water? Eventually, we'll also do a deeper episode into all of the elements, but even on the most foundational level, you can feel into those elements and like that part of you and maybe how that part of you seeks to be expressed through the element.
Absolutely. And mastering the sign, the house, and the planets will give you a whole view of your chart. So we've got the episodes, we're ready to support you, and we know you can do this and get a really good idea of how your soul came here to express itself, and then just like let it happen or make it happen.
Yeah. Okay. So are we ready to dive in to the meat of the episode? So kicking us off, we're going to talk about these in 4 separate sections. We're going to talk about them through the luminaries, the personal planets, the social planets, and the generational planets. So that's how we're going to kind of step through this episode. So kicking us off with the luminaries, the 2 luminaries being the sun and the moon. The sun rules the daytime world, the daytime sky, and the moon rules the nighttime world and the nighttime sky. And these 2 parts of us really play the most central role in our entire chart. So the sun represents your core identity and your life purpose in the world. It's your vitality, your creative power, your self-expression, the heart of your being, and really your shining light. When I think of the sun, I really think about the archetype of the leader. The sun also really represents like the masculine energy that lives within all of us. It's also the ruling sign of Leo. So you can really think about the Leo qualities. And when you think about that, you can think about, okay, the sun energy. The sun rules the sign of Leo. So I kind of mentioned this, right, before in several episodes that the sun makes up 70% of who you are. So just kind of repeating a little bit, like all these other parts of us, the aspects of ourselves through the other planets are really creating these nuances and subtleties to the way that your sun energy is showing up and being expressed out in the world. So your sun energy being your core identity, your self-expression. The reason why your sun in Scorpio might look completely different from somebody else's sun in Scorpio is because you're not just this sun in Scorpio energy. If we were all just a sun in Scorpio, sure, we might all show up in the same way. But no, you have so many other planets and so many different signs and so many different houses. And like nobody else in this entire world has the same chart as you. So your expression of your sun, again, so unique and core to you. And is why we all have a different life purpose that we came here to live. No one's purpose in life is going to be expressed in the same way, which is why it's so funny we compare ourselves to other people. It's like if we were all just like being so individual and true to the purpose that we were living in life, then like there would be no need to self-compare, because our mission, our purpose in this world is just so unique to us, just like our birth chart is so unique to us. So your sun is really describing it. It's like got that main character energy, right? It is the part of you that is center of the stage, loud and proud. It is like the leader of your entire chart. And it's going to really help you understand how you came here to so naturally and effortlessly just shine in the world. That's not to say sometimes your sun energy is not going to be, a challenge. Like for me, Saturn, we talked about Saturn in another episode, the planet of life lessons, of sometimes challenges and growth, isn't the same sign of my sun. And so there's this energy with my sun energy that does feel a little bit uncomfortable for me. And that's part of my own unique journey with my sun energy. But ultimately, there are so many pieces of our sun energy that are ways that we came here to be naturally expressed out in this world and as a way to just express our own individuality. I also want to say too that it's where you came here to kind of go on this lifelong quest of yours, right? You're your sun energy for your entire life, but it really helps you understand who you are in the process of becoming and the journey that you came here to take throughout your entire life. When we think of creative self-expression in this world, we think about like our own creative inner power and the creative power that we came here to develop over the course of our life. Now, the only other thing I want to say, which I shared this in our house episode, is that the house of your sun is the most important house in your entire chart. It is the area of your life where you came here to seek expression the most and where you came here to express yourself through living out your soul's purpose. So, as a reminder, also be sure to go check out episode 1 where we go into a lot more detail in a different way about the sun and the moon and the rising sign as well.
Excellent. So the moon is a completely different energy than what Keelie just described with the sun. So the moon is really governing our emotions, our intuition, our subconscious needs. This is the development of our soul. Now, I like to think of this as the moon is making its rounds every 28 to 30 days in the chart. Usually it's like 29 and a half days. And so this is one of the first planetary luminary bodies that we are getting to know really quickly as children, as young people. And it makes so much sense because it is governing our emotions. It's like, how are our needs being met, whether we know them or not? And so this inner world and how you process feelings, the moon is kind of behind closed doors. We talked about this in episode 1, that if you were on a date, someone's not going to meet your moon sign until a couple of dates in. I mean, unless you're like super into them and somehow like you guys are going deep on the first date. But that's like more like when you're on vacation or you have your first fight with someone, that's really who's going to get to know your moon. You know, your parents know your moon because they live with you. Your roommates will probably know your moon because they also live with you. But this isn't something you wear on your sleeve. It's a little bit more behind closed doors. Now, the moon is the ruler of Cancer. So we can see how this natural emotional body, watery energy, is connected to the tides. The moon is so closely related to everything to do with Cancer because that is who it rules. Nurturing, home, security. The moon is the feminine luminary and is often associated with the mother. We can see why, because it's our first person that we are like connecting with in this lifetime and reliant upon for life. And so the moon is so, so important. And if you think about how that mother connection, just even through birth, is so important to our survival, think of the moon as also being super important to our survival. And we get the chance to work with it very, very often. The moon's kind of saying, hey, what kind of emotional experiences are necessary and essential for my happiness? When we're totally disconnected from our moon, we can often find that there feels like something is like unfulfilled or just like unmet or frustrating because there's something there that's like we're not getting what we need. And so what actually is essential for my happiness is connecting with that moon energy. What house is it in? What sign is it in? Can give you even more knowledge of like how to actually work with it. How can my moodiness and irrationality express within me? It's a great question when it comes to the moon because sometimes that needs to be felt and it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be seen. I often think of like all these planets as like welcoming in all of the parts of ourselves. And when we learn to say, hey, like I see you, I understand you, I work with you, I know you, it allows for such more, depth of expression, and it can really help us work with the chart. But the moon especially is really begging for this energy. And then, another thing that the moon asks is like, hey, what unconscious needs are motivating me and my behavior? We talked in episode 1 about my Aries moon, and sometimes I just need to be a little bit childlike. I just need to like let it out and have that moment of like, kind of like a hissy fit sometimes where I'm just like, oh, like I just want to yell or something or like kick and stomp. And it's like, it seems so childish, but actually like that's what my moon is like saying, hey, this is going to make us feel better. Like just go bang your fists on the pillow for a second and you're going to feel better. So work with whatever you've got going on and, think about the moon's energy shifts as like phases in your own mood and see if you can see where the moon is and like how it's impacting your mood. And especially if you are a Cancer moon, which I'm not, but if you are a Cancer moon, the moon is really impacting your life even more. So I always say that Cancer moons feel the moon with the most depth, and that's so important to them. So I invite you to welcome in everything your moon is asking for. It will change your life.
Yeah, I love that. So, moving into our second part, we are now getting into the personal planets. Now, the sun and the moon, we can kind of still consider them personal in the sense that, all of our personal planets really represent the most personal parts of ourselves. They're really core to our character. The sun and the moon, like technically speaking, we call them the luminaries, and the additional personal planets being Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So, starting off with Mercury, Mercury is the planet of communication and learning. It's also the planet of language and ideas, education, connection, and commerce. It's really seen as the messenger or the thinker archetypes. It's kind of like your own mental little Wi-Fi. It's like how you're connected and buzzing around and interacting with the rest of the world. And it's the ruler of two signs, actually, Gemini and Virgo. So if you have either of those signs really prominent in your chart, then Mercury is going to be a really important planet for you as you are living out your purpose. It's kind of a leading energy for you in your chart. So Mercury really describes how you learn and how you perceive information out in the world. It helps you understand like the learning style that really is going to suit you best. It also describes how you are going to communicate to others what you know, how you share information, how you are this messenger in the world. It describes like the actual voice itself that's within you and how you express your ideas to other people in the outside world. It can also help you understand your relationship with speech itself and what your relationship with speech was in your early developmental stages. I can only imagine maybe if you have Saturn right there with Mercury, that would be a really interesting relationship for you to just kind of sit with. What is Saturn here to kind of teach you about speech and the message that you're here to share and about your own voice? Were there challenges there? Is it kind of something that you kind of had to work with? And in what ways is Saturn here to ask you grow? That is, of course, a little bit more technical, but just something like as you're kind of looking at, the signs and the houses that these planets are in, like look at kind of like what planets are in the same signs as one another and what does that have to say? Just like my Saturn is in the same sign as my sun sign, like kind of looking at what relationship does Mercury have in the way that you talk and communicate with some of your other planets too in your chart. Mercury is never going to be more than 28 degrees away from your sun. So you're always going to see Mercury in your chart either in the same sign as your sun or in the sign right before your sun or right after your sun. If Mercury is in a different sign than your sun, that's going to help you kind of understand, one, maybe you're expressing yourself, maybe you're thinking about life in the world in a bit of a different way than the actual like expression of your energy and the purpose that you came here to live. If it's in the same sign, then you can kind of see there's this congruency with like how you're communicating, how you're expressing yourself, what you're thinking about, the way that you're talking is like, in, I guess, more alignment with like the way that you're expressing yourself energetically out in the world. But if it's different, then like that kind of really flavors the purpose that you came here to live, and when you're thinking about your sun energy and Mercury being in a different sign, how can you kind of work with those two energies together to really communicate your purpose, your mission, to speak about your message out in the world in a purpose fulfilling way? And then the sign and the house of your Mercury is really going to help you understand, how you express yourself, how you communicate, and when you're looking at the house specifically, like the kinds of things that you like to learn about, think about, or talk about. Okay, so Venus. Venus is the planet of love and pleasure. It's also the planet of relationships, beauty, romance, attraction, aesthetics, art, music, also sexual desire, your self-worth, and your values in life. So there's so many parts of ourselves that we can really work with and understand when we're working with this planet of Venus, especially in relationships and what it's like for us to be in partnership. So Venus is really seen as like the lover and the artist archetypes. It rules both Taurus and Libra. So it's another planet that rules 2 signs in the zodiacal wheel. So Venus describes really your desire for love and for romance in the world. It helps you understand what you really seek out in a partner and what you find most attractive in another person, what you're drawn to, and also how you yourself make yourself more attractive in the world. And also how you express affection to another. So Venus really is this like inner romantic within you, and it helps you understand that part of yourself. It also describes how you are in relationship and how you seek to bond with another person. So that can be in a partnership, that can be in friendship, or really just anyone that's close to you, how you're really seeking to connect with them in this like deeper way. And then it also describes what you value and what brings you joy. So Venus is also kind of the planet of money. So really it's like the kind of things that you also like to spend money on. If you're spending money on something, it's probably something that you really value that really is going to bring you joy. So you guys can look to the sign and the house placement of your Venus to really better understand, your own unique zodiac love language and the kinds of qualities that you're going to seek out in a partner and the parts of you that, really seek out expression of relationship. When I learned about my own Venus, it blew my mind, and it also helped me just understand myself and my needs in a relationship in a way that just opened my eyes completely. So if you're not familiar with your Venus, then that's definitely an area that I recommend starting to explore now and really deepen into and understand about yourself.
Venus is such a fun one to explore. When I discovered my Venus as well, I was like, oh, okay, I've got to learn about this because this to me makes no sense. I was expecting some woo-woo, so fun thing. And I was like, oh, I have Venus in Capricorn. Okay, cool.
Oh, wait, how do you feel like you relate to that?
I relate to that in the way that I seek love is by being a boss. I want to be the best. When I was in my corporate job, I was like, everyone will love me if I'm successful, that kind of feeling. And that took a lot to unpack and unravel over the years. I was like, wow, okay. But then now I realize that how I really receive love is from a very solid and secure relationship. And if you listen to our Is Your Partner as Woo Woo as You episode, you're going to hear yeah, that was so important to my evolution and my awakening spiritually, to have that solid foundation and that solid, support system in my life. And so, yeah, it really makes a lot of sense now. But when I first learned, I was like, oh, how unexciting is this? It is not. It is actually really good. But speaking of another exciting planet, we have Mars. So Mars is our third personal planet, and Mars is really the warrior and the motivator archetype, and it brings such an interesting perspective to our chart. So we've already gone through communication, we've gone through how we receive love and how we give love and beauty and pleasure, and now we're here at Mars, and Mars is ruling energy, action, desire, conflict. Mars is the god of war. And when I always talk about this, people are like, war, oh my gosh. No, but think of this. War consciousness is not just big bodies of people fighting with each other. War consciousness can be us versus them, you versus me versus me. And so when I think of Mars and how it operates in our chart, it's our inner fire. It's how do we pursue goals and handle challenges, but can give us a lot of insight as to how we also challenge ourselves and how we are also, kind of at war with ourselves sometimes. So it's a great thing to really explore more and learn how do you fight, because you're also fighting with yourself sometimes too. So this shows so much about assertiveness. Mars is how are you going to assert yourself in the world? And if you think of children, how they start to assert themselves, it's kind of weird. You're oh, what are they saying? If you're listening to children on the playground, or you're listening to maybe your neighbor kids play, and it's very fascinating how it starts. And you can see maybe some of that's coming from home, but it's how easily can you express what Mercury's asking you to express? And how can I be more assertive to avoid conflict and unnecessary strife? These are questions Mars is asking us throughout our life, but sometimes it can come out as what did you just say? You know what I mean? Mars can be a little bit difficult to express if not well tended to and maintained. So it's really nice to know, one, how am I expressing myself through Mercury? And then two, what is that fire and that action and that spark that Mars is just naturally adding to my life that I can learn how to wield this amazing power of assertiveness? Stephen Forrest says that Mars is the sign of Face the Bears. And that's all you need to know about Mars. And that makes me laugh. Every time I think about that, I'm yeah, that is very Mars attitude. Mars is the ruler of Aries. So bold and direct. And historically, it was the ruler of Scorpio. So we can understand that all of this is associated with the will to live, the inner fight, and our survival instincts. Very Aries in nature, very warrior, very motivated to go out and pursue those goals. People think that Mars in water signs is a bad thing. Like, they're like, oh, that's just not, Mars isn't happy in a water sign because it's fire, right? And like, what puts out fire? Water. Not always true. Think about this in a water sign as like an emotional warrior. So someone who can really go there emotionally, especially, let's just think about Mars in Pisces. Like, that can be really, really powerful for somebody to be able to go into that depth and be such a humanitarian and feel that way and take action in that way. Mars in fire signs, though, that's some passionate energy. And I think if you add some air, into that Mars sign, then we're talking about even bigger explosion. Oxygen and air is necessary for fire to flow. So even though it's traditionally ruled by a fire sign, Mars can really function in any of the signs. And I think, as Keelie said, looking at the element can be really helpful to just get a little gist of like, what energy is Mars bringing into your chart? But of course, the sign and the house will give you a really important idea. I personally have Mars in a water sign, and I think it's an emotional warrior, but I do love the spark of energy it provides. So next, we are moving into the social planets. We just talked all about personal planets, and social planets are, if we think of just the word social, we're meeting all these other planets fairly quickly. They're moving around the zodiacal wheel, the natal wheel, fairly often, right? So every couple of weeks, every couple of months, they're changing signs. So they're not too distant from us. But Jupiter takes 14 years to go around the whole wheel. And so when we think of that, we're not really meeting these social planets in their full way until we're a little bit older, until we're in that socialized nature. We're no longer just at home. We're interacting with friends. We're out in society, and same with Saturn. So Jupiter and Saturn are our social planets, and we're seeing them later in life once we've developed a bit more. And so it's giving us that like societal rules and regulation vibe, like what is the deal here? And so that's why we call them more social planets. So thinking of Jupiter, okay, Jupiter is the teacher, the explorer. This is a really cool planet, Keelie's favorite, as we heard at the beginning of the episode. The themes here for Jupiter are symbolizing expansion, growth, luck, higher learning. Jupiter's like, you can do it. You can do this thing, and it's pushing you to dream really big. Jupiter is massive, as we kind of hinted to in the beginning. Like, I think if you put all the other planets, moons, asteroids, whatever together, it still wouldn't be as big as Jupiter, which is kind of like wild to even think about. So like, when we say it's big, it's really big. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, which is super adventurous in nature, very philosophical, the learner, the adventurer. It's just a beautiful, beautiful sign. And historically, it ruled Pisces. So we've actually talked about this a few times throughout the episode about traditional rulers and current rulers. And I just want to take a note on this in case you're like, what are we talking about? Back in the day, they couldn't see Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto with the telescopes they had. They were like, we didn't even know they existed. So the planets and the signs had different rulership because they were just, adding different pieces of what the themes were and the archetypes of these planets and these signs together. But as they could see more planets that came on the scene later, they were able to say, oh, you know what, the rulership is a bit more expanded. So that's when we say the traditional historical ruler. That's what we were talking about. But Jupiter placement highlights where you experience abundance and where you're seeking meaning. Simply, I like to think about Jupiter as maintaining faith. Can I do this thing? Can I make it happen? Can I dream even bigger? And when we talk about Neptune, you'll see how these two things are coming together and like where that makes a lot of sense. But, Jupiter is also big on vitality and confidence. Where are we taking too much for granted? Jupiter's like, can you appreciate this just a bit more? It's a really, really big and beautiful, energetic body, if you will. Jupiter is the king of the gods, and like I said, it's a massive planet. But people with major Jupiter influence, when you meet them, they have really high spirits. You can almost feel them in a room. Like, they have this like emanating sparkly energy, and it's like very divine. It's really, really nice energy. Sometimes Jupiter can be seen as too positive, so it's necessary to make sure we aren't taking the wrong path, like with rose-colored glasses. They say like kings and fools, like it's a very thin line, like you can be a little bit too puffed up and like confident in everything and just like not looking at like what's going on around you. And so Jupiter is asking you to maintain that expansive faith with also keeping your wits about you so you don't make that, fine line decision. So Jupiter can also say like where you're naturally lucky in your life. So look at the house placement in the sign and see if that kind of rings true for you, or if you can realize that maybe you've been ignoring that in the past and it actually is true for you.
So the next sign is Saturn, which Saturn is the planet that is discipline, structure, responsibility. It's also the planet of authority, maturity, concentration, limitations, and tradition. Saturn is a very traditional planet of ours. And Saturn is seen a lot as like the mentor or even like the judge archetypes. I also like to think of Saturn as like the tough love teacher who, can really like hand you life syllabus that like you're here to learn. We talked a lot about kind of like the tough teacher in our Saturn episode. So make sure to go check that out too, just to kind of get some more flavor around Saturn as well in your chart. But Saturn rules Capricorn, and it's also the historical or traditional ruler of Aquarius. So as the ruler of Capricorn, I really think of Saturn as like our own inner CEO. It tells us how and where we really came here to set goals, work hard, and achieve. It's where we're here to be really focused, very concentrated, really put in the work, and not get lazy. It's going to describe also where we seek out or are needing structure in our life. It's an area of life where we can be more orderly and methodical, more responsible, committed, and also more serious. So we tend to take life more seriously in the area of life or the house that Saturn is placed, which is so interesting to think about because Saturn for me is in my fifth house. Well, we talked about the fifth house as the house of like joy and play and children and creativity. And I'm like, how interesting, just connecting like the kind of seriousness that I take when it comes to like play and like things like that. So Saturn is also like, I think about it, we call it like kind of like the judge archetype, but also it's kind of like the police officer of our chart. It really is here to enforce the rules, tell us when we're breaking our own laws. So one of the things that you guys can really think about is Jupiter in your chart actually represents your own personal law. So looking at the energy of Jupiter in your chart, when you're not following your Jupiter law that you have really kind of come into this life to follow, Saturn is going to come in and say, you're breaking the law and like you might get punished for not following your Jupiter. So it really helps you keep your own life in order. It keeps you from going out of bounds. Think like it's like your own referee too. It tells you when you're going out of bounds. And as long as you don't go out of bounds, as long as you're following your own rules and following your own law of Jupiter, then the game is still on. When I think about this in my own chart, I love to also kind of use human design. I look at the gates of my Jupiter and my human design. And I kind of look at those energies and like, what's my relationship with those gates in my human design? And like, am I not out in the world expressing those in a way that feels really aligned with me and is really like, am I using those energy? Am I using those gates in fulfillment of my purpose? Or am I just like stuffing them away? If I'm being honest, my Jupiter gates feel really uncomfortable for me. So it's interesting to think about, okay, how can I really lean into my Jupiter gates? How can I really embody those Jupiter gates so that I can, follow the rules and not get Saturn coming in being like, all right, here's your lessons. Like you're not pushing yourself hard enough. Like let's grow here. So Saturn is the most outer planet that is visible to the naked eye. And this is why Saturn really represents limitations, because it's the limitation of what is actually visible for us to see in this way through the naked eye. Beyond that comes like all the generational planets. So it really is that like outer limitation of what we can see in the world. And it's why it's also considered like the authority figure of our chart. It's where we are really bound by limitations. So again, look to the sign, look to the house so that you can better understand what's your relationship with achievement and success. Where and how are you here to really grow through putting in the work, putting in effort, and persevering? What's the area of life where you came here to achieve success through putting in the work? That can help you understand your house placement and also about the lessons that you came here to learn. Again, check out the Saturn episode there. Okay, moving into the generational planets. So Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all considered generational planets. And this is because these planets have very slow orbits and they spend a lot of time in each of these zodiac signs. So for the generational planets, I really like to place more emphasis on the house placements of these planets in your chart because these planets are staying in the zodiac sign for so long, you're going to have the same placement as anyone else who falls in that same, generation for that planet. So for Uranus, it stays in a sign about 7 years. For Neptune, it stays in a sign about 14 years. And for Pluto, it can stay in a sign up to like 27 years. So that's why these are generational planets. So we really recommend, yes, it's great to know the sign of them. It's great to understand that part of you on this like generational collective level. Also, look at the house placement because that is the part of this planet that is very unique to you. So kicking us off with Uranus, Uranus is the planet of change, liberation, innovation, freedom. It's also the planet of originality, independence, rebellion, revolution, and your intellect. It really is seen as the disruptor of your chart and also the genius archetype in your chart. It's the modern ruler of Aquarius, and Uranus really does describe the rebel that lives within you. It's where you came here to be disruptive, where you came here to stand apart from everyone else and set yourself apart from the crowd. It's where you came here to be different and also be a bit of an outsider, and where you're not here to play by the rules. If Saturn is the planet of rules, then Uranus is the planet of breaking them. We all have that balance, right? And so where you came here to break free from limitations that life places you under, that's what Uranus tells you. It tells you where. Look at the area of life. Look at the house placement. Where are you here to break free from the limitations that life places you under? This is kind of the area of your chart too, where I say like Saturn looks the other way. It's like, okay, like we're going to follow the rules. We're going to like, stay in bounds, but also wherever Uranus lies, like I'm just going to look the other way. That's where you're here to really break free from limitations. And then I was thinking about this too. I was like, how interesting would it be if someone had Uranus and Saturn right there next to each other in the chart? Like, is that you?
Yes.
It's like, boom, like I'm breaking boundaries and I'm breaking limitations that are like, whoa, reeling you back in. Like that's such a probably interesting relationship to have Saturn and Uranus right there next to each other in the chart.
It's like whiplash.
Yeah, is it? That's so fascinating. So, this is just really overall going to help you understand where in your life you also like in a little bit of a different energy. You can really look to Uranus to understand where in your life you may have also experienced some separation, maybe some radical change, also some instability and inconsistency. We know that Uranus really is this planet of like sudden shock, sudden change. So this could have been an area of your life that maybe it just felt like there was a lot of inconsistency, a lot of instability, a lot of like, all over the place and feeling a bit rocky because of all the change.
Yeah, having that Uranus so close to my own Saturn, I know this very well. And those of you born in late 1989, early 1990, you know it really well too, because we all have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune conjunct in our charts in Capricorn. So it's quite an interesting dynamic. And I think with these evolutionary planets, I just want to mention before we dive into Neptune, these evolutionary planets, while you do pick them as like a giant cohort and they're the same sign as we have with our peers because they move so slowly, that I think that this is one of the places in our life that we can really evolve these placements. We can pick higher octaves to pursue, and they have great lessons for us when we really look into how do we evolve these placements, because just as we said at the start of the episode, like just because you're a Scorpio sun, it doesn't mean you're exactly like someone else who's a Scorpio sun. Well, same with, Uranus in Capricorn or, things like that. Like they have different expressions that we can actually evolve in this lifetime. So I find these planets to be super exciting in that way, especially Neptune, because I think Neptune is like kind of a mysterious on purpose planet. And so Neptune is the mystic, the dreamer. Neptune is the ruler of Pisces, and Pisces is so associated with compassion and mysticism. Like there's no deeper place for Neptune to be. When we think of Neptune, we think of dreams, we think of spirituality, intuition, illusions. It is the planet of creativity and higher connection but it can be really blurry. It can be a little bit like, what's actually going on here? I think of like if you're at the eye doctor and they're like, is this one better? Is this one better? And both of them are blurry. And you're like, what is happening right now? That's Neptune. It can only get clearer when you start to work with it and when you trust in that illusionary stillness that Neptune asks for. So, this placement can show where you're dreaming big or where you're facing some confusion, and it really can go either way. And so, Neptune's kind of removing the ego from our self view. Now, the ego is super important. It's not, I know in some societies the ego is like the end all be all, like we must get rid of the ego. It's like, no, I think the ego keeps us alive. I think it's good. It's like motivation. But Neptune's saying like, can we separate ourselves from the ego a bit and like put on these different hats of personalities to move throughout the world and to experience this life? I know that Jupiter is associated with faith, but I also think of Neptune as like faith when things get hard. Will you show up when things are really difficult? What's keeping you showing up in those difficult times? Neptune's faith, really asking for that. In the depths, can you be with it? Neptune's blurring the lines of consciousness and unconsciousness. We're going to talk about the subconscious a bit more with Pluto, but this is kind of like this or that. Neptune's blurring those lines there. And it's helping us in the development of understanding that there is something beyond just us. Maybe you call that a higher power. Maybe a lot of people call it God. Whatever you call it, just things being beyond. Neptune's like, can you be down with that? Like, have you ever thought about that? She's asking us those like harder, more philosophical questions. Neptune's asking, how can I remove logic and function more intuitively? Neptune's a great planet to work with when you want to trust in your intuition a little bit more, because it really is removing that ego and like asking you, how am I contributing to my own self-destruction? Sometimes we can be a little bit blind, like, no, I'm not the problem. It's like, maybe I am contributing a little bit to some of my own problems. And it kind of asks you to like face the music there. Where am I relying on wishes versus actually seeing what reality is? Like, I wish it was different. I wish it was better. Like, how about we just focus on what's actually happening? Neptune kind of gives us that taste, like almost when the fog lifts from the beach and you're like, oh wow, there's rocks over there. Like, that's just really what Neptune can do. Blur completely, and it can really reveal very quickly. So I think of Neptune's big question is asking you, who are you really? Who are you versus who you think you are? It's like decoupling from the countless identities we give ourselves and like all the letters after our name or the titles we put on our LinkedIn or our Instagram bios. Like, who are you beyond all that? Beyond, this is my family and I have 2 dogs and like yada yada. Like, who are you really? Neptune's thinking is asking us to go further than just existence, a blank state, the void. What is the void anyway? That's like Neptune's question. So when you think of Neptune, think of the stillness of the fog. And also think about, like a monastery. Neptune's asking you to go there. Be in that stillness. Be cool with it. It can be hard to navigate Neptune, but I think that's also part of the mystery. And if you think of like Pisces energy, it makes a lot of sense. And for me, I've struggled personally to work with Neptune before because I was like, WTF, man, like there's a lot going on here. I don't understand what you're asking of me. And because it's conjunct so many other planets in my chart, opposite Jupiter, I just feel like there's like a lot of digging that must be done for me to meet Neptune. And I'm really glad that this year I did that. Well, 2024 I did, so that I could like learn that different side of it. So if you've never really thought about Neptune or think of him just like the king of the sea or something, so much more here for you. So something a little bit different. We've gone through Uranus, we've gone through Neptune, and now we're reaching Pluto, the furthest away planet. So tiny in comparison to Jupiter and many other things. But Pluto's like, hey, I'm the alchemist on the scene. I'm the shadow worker. Pluto Pluto symbolizes transformation, power, rebirth, death. You got to think about it. In order to be reborn, sometimes you have to let it die. It doesn't necessarily mean death as people hear it. Maybe it's an ego death or, a restarting a cycle of something like that. But this is the planet of intensity. This is deep inner work. People talk about the phoenix rising from the ashes, like the bird that somehow burnt down and now is like flying again. Pluto has this power. It allows us to remove what's no longer serving. And because this is such a slow-moving generational planet, it often seems to be very tied to collective themes. But as I mentioned before, I think that Pluto's really powerful on a personal level too, and it allows us to transform in a way that, like, if we think of it like a ripple effect, it is affecting the whole collective in such a powerful way. Each person that changes makes a ripple and makes a way for somebody else to experience a new experience as well. So check out episode 4 on Pluto's entrance into Aquarius for the next 20 years, because this is a major shift. Pluto moves very slowly and doesn't change signs often, so we have just entered a new era, and it's very, very exciting. So of course, you're probably like, why does Nicole love Pluto so much? Well, it is the ruler of Scorpio, so my chart is completely ruled by this planet. Associated with the underworld and shadow work, it can come off with a bad vibe sometimes, but it's not. We have to be willing to, like, go under and then come back up. It's like, imagine when you're a kid and you're diving for those little sticks in the pool. It's not so scary. You just dove under, you got the stick, and you're like, woo, I got it. You know, it's like, think of Pluto like that if it kind of freaks you out. This placement reveals where you experience profound transformation in your life. And look at what other planets it is close to, you know, in your chart, because think about that energy is just being multiplied and all of that. I mean, me personally, I've got it conjunct my ascendant, my sun, and my Mercury. So I'm like, okay, this is some big energy. I think of Pluto as like destiny. Realizing most things in life are like a very narrow pursuit when it comes to our destiny. Like, we might think that this one thing was so big and so difficult and so arduous and like such a big deal. And then like in 5 years from now, you won't even be able to remember the details. That's kind of what Pluto perspective gives you. It's like, oh, that thing that I lost sleep over like 2 years ago really it wasn't that big of a deal because I'm on this much bigger and more important transformative journey. And so that's kind of the perspective Pluto gives. Sometimes it takes time. Pluto's asking, where do I find significance in my life? How am I needed in this life? How can I not get sucked into dogmatic or like a megalomaniac type of ideal or behavior in my pursuit of destiny? This is super important because sometimes Pluto can make us a bit like crazy and we can be like, this is the only way. I mean, it really just depends where it is in your chart, but don't get sucked into that like dogmatic or rigid thinking when it comes to Pluto, because it is all a cycle and it's a transformative process. So unlike Neptune that really thrives on the stillness, think of that monastery, that peaceful fog in nature, Pluto needs movement, and it will create it. It will create the movement for you in your life. It will remove what no longer serves you. It will place new things in your path to make sure you see them. And it really helps us embody and transmute like collective fears into something with a bigger and greater meaning. So you might have like this unknown fear of something going on. You're like, why am I afraid of this? And it's actually really put in your life to help you transmute it and to make a different meaning so that you can move forward with more power, more understanding, more compassion. It is a largely personal activity, but like I said, this Pluto has a huge impact on the collective and everybody of a generation. And so it's usually creating an impact larger than we realize. People say that Pluto's cycles are slow but life-changing, and they provide us with the ultimate life makeover. And I think that is really true. Pluto's like, you're digging and you're almost always going to find treasure if you truly, truly keep going.
Yeah, Pluto really is this lifelong transformation for us, like truly. And if you also just look at the house of your Pluto placement, I think it's just so interesting. And as you were talking, I was just reflecting on the house of my Pluto and just like, wow, how fascinating it is that like that area of life really is a place where I am here to transform over the course of my entire life. And as you said, there really is like a treasure to be found if you take the journey with Pluto and really go into it and dive into it. So I love also just your explanation on Neptune as well. Neptune has always been one of those planets that is so, it makes sense. It's such an ethereal planet, so spiritual. And I'm just like, it's hard to grasp. It's so hard to grasp because there is nothing to grasp with Neptune, you know? It's like, it is so out there. So yeah, for some of these generational planets, even with Uranus, like all of them, all three of them, I'm just like, they're not as personal. So they can be a bit harder to like understand and wrap your head around at first, but spend some time with them. Like Nicole said, like the WTF with Neptune, like at first, like what is this? Spend some time with them and take your time getting to know them, getting to know those parts of you, and just kind of observe yourself as you are embodying those different energies And also too, how like the generation that you're living in, like what are some of those similarities? Like what together are you guys all here to do together as a generation for everyone with that planet and that sign? That's cool to think about too.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the Pluto and Capricorn generation to like grow of age. I mean, some of them already have, but like to really kind of come of age and like start making changes in the world of our structure, right? If you think about that, I think of Pluto and Sagittarius generation as the ones who are finally like, enough is enough. Like, this is crazy. We can't work like this. And I'm like, yes, tell them we can't work like this, because it benefits us all. And I imagine like the Pluto in, Virgo generation going like, this is insane, like at Pluto and Sagittarius generation. And if we think of all that as like boomers versus like Gen Z, like they all go back to a generation. And while the Pluto and Scorpio generation is probably the smallest, it's like, we have a big impact to make too. If you think about the rise of mental health and how we've really tackled these things that are not normal for us to feel and just like making them more accessible and people are talking about how they feel, like I think that's a huge part of our generation. At least Keelie and I are both Pluto and Scorpio and so many other things. And Pluto can be a really powerful way to mark a generation and to also see the difference that they're here to make as a whole. But I'm super thankful for the Pluto and Sagittarius generation for like really normalizing work from home. Because thank goodness that was really needed. And I know even just from working in the corporate world that people are like, what's wrong with these kids? They think like this is not normal. Well, you should have seen the way I had to work. And I was like, yeah, well, if we only could understand their Pluto placement, we would get it so much more. And another note I just have to make, I'm so glad that Keelie and I both pronounce Uranus the same, because this episode would have been real weird if we were pronouncing it differently.
That's so funny. Yeah, I don't think that was how I always pronounced it. And then I think somewhere along the way I worked with different astrologers. I was like, this is very nice.
This is the best way to do it. Yeah, I've heard many different varieties and I'm like, you know what? This is the way. And I've had to like practice it over the years to not say it differently. And I even like, people are like, wait, what are you really saying? And I was like, you know what I'm saying? It's the planet. It's Uranus.
That is so funny. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today in this episode. We hope you all enjoyed learning about the planets with us and are able to just deepen into all of these aspects of yourself through the understanding and the explanations that we shared with you guys today. So thank you all again for being here with us. We are so happy to have you all here. If you're loving the episode, if you've got another astrology friend out there, please feel free to share the episode with them. Leave us a review to help us grow the podcast. We always also just love to hear from you guys, and it brings us so much joy when we get to just see how this podcast is supporting you in your astrological journey. So with that, we will be back for another episode next week, and we will talk to you guys again soon.
Talk soon. Bye.